All right, today Cam and I are going to be bouncing back and forth on the forward front suspension, the A-arm style suspension like we've got right here in front of us. They use this thing on pretty much anything that didn't move away fast enough in the mid-size on down, from the Torino Fairlane, Mustang, Maverick, Granada,
just
Comet, Montego.
Except big body stuff, that's the deal.
Lots of things used this very style right here. So what we're going to talk about today is just some tips and tricks. If you're going to be doing this, little things that we found that work really, really well for making that happen. All right, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the spring compressor that we use. We got this from Max Fabrication. This is a really sharp and good spring compressor for doing these kind of front ends because it actually uses the spring perch to pull the spring up off of here. You just have to unbolt it from underneath the bottom here and it'll pull it right up into the top. A lot safer than the inside coil and a lot less hassle. I'll say that right now. The biggest hassle is you have to take the shock out, which you got to take the shock out anyway. This is a great way to go when you're doing that kind of stuff.
All right, so the next thing is spring installation. All right, so one thing, you want the isolator on the top. This is not 100% necessary, but this will quiet down the spring a lot. If you don't have this in there, anytime the suspension droops down, the spring runs a chance of coming off of its seat in the top of the shock tower, and is going to clang back up in there once you go and compress the suspension again. Now the next thing is orientation of the spring perch and the spring when you install it. The top of the spring can sit anywhere on its locator inside the shock tower, but you want the tail of the spring to sit right against the stop on your perch. So that will allow the spring perch to actually line up with the control arm bolts, because the vulcanized rubber is set at an angle. So if you put it in backwards, you're basically going to have to pry this whole perch in the wrong direction, and you're going to end up ripping the rubber out in probably like 10 miles. So make sure you always have it against the corner and you're good to go.
All right, now the next one is leave your lowers loose. You can go ahead and tighten up the bolt on the inside here, and I'm going to give you a quick tech tip on that in just a minute. But the lower control arm, I leave it loose inside the mount for a reason. Whenever you're putting this thing back down on the suspension, it'll allow you to rest it into correct location, and then you can tighten down your bolts. Otherwise, if you tighten it now, you risk ripping the vulcanized rubber. Now, if you have a Heim joint style lower control arm, or if you're running one that has urethanes on it that are not vulcanized into the mount position, you don't have to worry about that. But if you still tighten all that stuff down, it's going to sit high for a while until you put it through a little bit of, let's just say, spirited driving. Yeah.
All right, next one is to support the spindle. Now, when you're doing the suspension, if you take the upper control arm out and you have it just sitting on the lower control arm with the strut rod like this, it'll only go down a little bit, but it can pull tension onto your brake line. Never leave it hanging on your brake line. I've got the upper control arms underneath the spindle right now holding it up, but also one of my favorites is to just take zip ties, go through the top hole, any kind of hole you have, anywhere, it doesn't matter, and just zip tie it up. Easy peasy, adjustable length, easy to go through, and it costs 20 cents. But always support the spindle, never leave it hanging on the rubber lines. Never a good idea.
All right, now on the same roll of what Cam was talking about, I have made a hook that I can actually take the whole spindle assembly when it is off of the lower control arm and off the upper control arm, hook it onto the lip in here that most of these classic cars have, and then put the spindle in that loop right there and just hang it off of this on the chassis so that that brake hose that he was talking about doesn't get damaged. Another little quickie in the side of that that's on the same roll but not is to go in and actually put a little bit of grease, a little bit of axle grease on the top flat portion of your spindle and also on the underside of your boot here. If you don't do that, sometimes you can get a boot rip from it turning. Another thing to look out for that we just noticed on this that I'm going to have to work on is that there is a sharp upper edge on this boot right here. So I'll need to get a Dremel tool and go in and just relieve that edge just a little bit so that we don't have any sharp edges that can kick into the boot, score the boot, and cause it to rip. Always make sure this kind of stuff is taken care of before you put it all together. Now this one's not enough together that I can't take it apart and fix that problem.
All right, so next up is how to separate the ball joints. Personally, I prefer a brass hammer. You can use a pickle fork. The pickle fork tends to rip the boots and make them non-reusable, but if you have one that's stuck that you cannot get out with a hammer, pickle fork's normally the only option besides heat. So pickle fork, you put it between the spindle or whatever joint you're trying to remove and the ball joint, and use it basically just as a ramp to force them apart. Whereas a brass hammer, you're going to hit whatever the ball joint goes through, and you're going to cause vibration in that to release the taper. And normally 4 or 5 whacks with a decent sized hammer will get it out. I prefer to use brass or a soft metal just so that you don't actually damage the spindle or whatever you're hitting. Because if you look right here, you can see all these marks. Somebody has probably gone in with a cross peen hammer, hitting in the completely wrong spot anyway, but trying to knock this loose, or yeah, that's marred up really bad there. So they probably were going in with a cross peen or a chisel, something that an idiot did. But that's besides the point.
This car is loaded with idiots.
But use the tools, the right tools. Either one of these will work. My preferred is the brass hammer.
All right, so what I'm going to talk about now is when you're doing a control arm system like this, before you put your shocks in, if you've got everything up in the air, I put wooden blocks in here, a cut in half 2x4 stacked like this, 2 of them, is a good idea to keep from overextending that spring, because what will happen, especially if you're putting a suspension in and you don't have an engine in the engine bay, is it will flex too much and you'll start to see a big bow in your coil spring, and it's going to frighten you, and it should, because you could be danger close to that spring perch rocking out and that spring just coming out of there like a bullet. Always do this. It's not necessary, but it's a good idea, especially when you don't have an engine in the engine bay.
All right, so the next thing is anti-seize. It's not needed on everything on the front suspension or rear suspension, but anything that goes through a sleeve, you really want to have anti-seize on it. All right, so this right here is a sway bar end link. There is a sleeve in the middle of it. Always anti-seize this because they will rust out horribly in the middle. Your lower control arm bolts, one, they should always be facing with the nut towards the back, so that when you're driving, the bolt has to work itself against the movement of the vehicle. But also anything that goes through a bushing, like the lower control arm bolts, the rear spring bolts, anything that has a steel bushing inside of rubber or just a steel bushing in general, you must anti-seize it if you ever want to remove it easily. The rear springs, if you ever do a set that are stuck, you will never forget to do that again, because that is a painful job when they are stuck inside those bushings, because that is a hardened steel bushing most times that your cheap, readily available Zawsaw blades or any type of blade that you can get is not going to want to cut through. So anti-seize, do your Tin Man impression for the day, and just get it over with and save yourself the headache.
All right, last thing I'm going to talk about is something that's kind of a little bit of a squirrel in the wood pile around here. We have had some parts. These actually were part of what I got when I bought a 67 Mustang Fastback back about 2007. And we didn't use them. We used some different control arms. And these sat in our larder from 2007 until the weekend we pulled them out to do this. And in all that time of sitting and the solvents and stuff, not in the solvents, but the solvents and stuff floating around the shop, these boots just turned to trash and ripped all the way around on both lower control arms. We had to replace both of them with new lower control arms. Anytime you go and you try to buy some used components from somebody, you might want to ask them when they bought them, because some of this stuff can look brand new, still be in a bag, and that'll happen to them. Caveat emptor. So there you go. Let's close this thing out. All right, so this comes from one of our Facebook guys that we have in one of our Fairlane groups. Asked me the question in Instant Messenger, what are some tips and tricks on what I should do when I'm putting the suspension in the front of my car, like little things that I can do to maybe speed things up a little bit. And that's exactly where this episode came from. So if you've got any ideas like that you want to see done, hey man, what's the best way to do this? I'm not saying we can show you the best way, but we can show you the way that we do it and some of the maybe time-saving things, because Cam is as lazy as the day is long.
Yep.
We can show you some of his lazy man routines. You know that Henry Ford once said to give the laziest man on the plant the hardest job, and he'll figure out an easy way to do it. Laziest man.
Right.
Folks, do me a favor. Check out the Patreon account at the $10 a month level. You get monthly meetings with me on Zoom. We're doing some really cool things, instituting some neat stuff around here. Darren is desperate to make money, so he came up with some plans. One of the plans he has is that we're going to do a monthly giveaway starting this month. Everybody is eligible. Anybody that comes in and is a monthly contributor and doesn't just come in for that 1 month hoping to win and then leave, you do have to stick around for a minute. If you come in and do that, then I will do a doodle of your car. You're looking at one of the ones I did recently. This is for the car show that we did, the virtual car show that we did about a month and a half ago. This basically was Rob Callick. He was the winner that time, and that's what he gets. He gets a little doodle for winning the car show. But you'll get a doodle once a month if you win in our little drawing that we do. Darren and I have still not come up with a name for it, but we will be doing that. We'll also be giving away coffee cups, t-shirts, keychains. If we can find some keychains, we'll be giving some keychains away, and then a few other little doodads and knickknacks to go along with you, just as a thank you for being part of our Patreon. I think it's a cool thing. A lot of guys don't take advantage of the monthly meeting on Patreon. It's on Sunday nights. I tried to pick that because it's an easy way to get in there. It's a good way to support us, to support Darren, so that Darren can learn that capitalism is how we make our money. Because if I don't have the capital, he doesn't ism. So that's how that goes. And guess what we're going to talk about now? That's right, folks, we're going to talk about Super Thanks. What is it?
A horrible name.
It is an absolutely terrible name. I'm sorry, YouTube. You helped me make myself money. But golly, Pete, you should have given a call. I would have literally spent hours and hours coming up with a name.
You could really afford a board of people to choose a better name.
Somebody at YouTube, please. Anyway, it's your one-time, if you want to give us a one-time gift for like, hey man, this video, these tech tips were awesome. I saved money because you sped me up from the way I normally do things on these front suspensions. I'm going to throw $10 your way one time. We'll put your name down here in the bottom or up here in the top or over here on the side. I'm not sure where it's going to go. That's up to Darren. And then, finally, be kind to each other, love on each other, treat each other nice. You guys have a great week, and we'll see you next time on Autorestomod.
Now we gotta finish this.
Well, I'm going to finish it. You go home. You got that nasty cold. You're boogering over on everything over there. I'm going to probably get a cold now. You.
Give him an HD nostrils cleanse.
I got some carburetor choke cleaner over there.
Yeah,
They'll probably
yeah.
open the boards up a little bit.
Clean me right out.